My name's Casey Rodriguez. I'm over here in client services as the client services manager. And Haley, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, my name is Hailie Roark. I work in the Information Security Operations team of Otis.
Today, we're going to be covering setting and maintaining permissions in Google Drive. So this is one of our primary tools for handling files and access for all PPS users, including students and even outside partners. So it's important for us to understand how this works. How do we maintain security while we're working on files? And how do we also make sure that the files we're working on are well organized and being visible by the people we're working with and having the best collaboration possible? So with Google Drive, there's two instances of it that everyone can be familiar with. We have our own personal drive that's assigned to us as an employee. So in that drive, it's fully restricted. Nobody else has access or visibility to what's inside that drive. And then we also have a newer feature that's been out for the last couple of years, which is shared drives. So these shared drives are meant to be a place to collaborate with, whether it's a teacher collaborating with students or whether it's different departments collaborating either internally or even externally with outside vendors. The important thing to note is that, on my drive, those files stick with the user. So when a user is suspended or is transitioning out of PPS, access to that is removed upon that suspension. Whereas a shared drive, people can come and go. So people can be added to the shared drive. They can add files into it. They may leave Portland Public, but those files would stay present in that shared drive for people to continue collaborating on. So firstly, with understanding those two drives, we have the files themselves. So when we're looking at permissions and for what a file is currently doing, there's a few ways we can look at that to get an idea. So for when we're in Google Drive, where we have our files at, what you can do either is select a file and right click on it and select view details, or you can have the file highlighted, as you can see in the bottom screenshot, and select the icon that has a little eye in it. Either of those are going to allow you to see further details about that individual file, what's taking place, who has access to it, and even where the file is located. So let's set an example here. We have a test file. When I look at the top of it, it's going to show me who currently has access. I can directly go from there and manage that access. So if I see somebody that shouldn't have access, I can go in there and make those changes, as well as the properties of the file. One useful feature that many people aren't aware of is that I can even add a description on that individual file for additional notes. So, the file could be called test file, but I could add a description saying, this was created for this purpose, or this is one file of 3, or this is for this project. Having those descriptions can be helpful in how you organize files as well. I believe it's indexed as well, so that when you're searching, those descriptions are also indexed for when you're trying to find items. As well, it's going to tell you who last modified the file, and even if someone's opened the file recently, an original creation date. That's all information that's helpful, because a lot of times we have a lot of files, we're not sure who is doing what in those files, and so understanding how those permissions work, being able to view them, you'll have a better understanding of what's taking place. So with having your files and your folders, the first point of permissions is being able to share those and share those properly. So there's two methods to be able to share a file. You can either right click on it and select the share icon, or you can do the same thing as before. We have the file or folder highlighted in the browser, and in the top right corner, you have the person with the plus icon. You can select that, and it's going to bring you up with the following screen. So here's an example screen. There's 3 areas that are important for us to understand when we're looking at or being presented with the shared file. You have the top right, which is a gear icon. That actually lets you apply settings to that specific file, and we'll go over those settings after this. You also have the people who have access, and on the right side, you can edit or choose what level of access that they have, and we're going to cover those levels of access as well. There's multiple levels of access, as well as other settings to where you can decide how long they have access for, and if it's going to be viewable outside of the district. And then for one method that I enjoy sharing my files is always through a link, right? You're talking with somebody, you say, hey, can I see that file? You provide them a link. So that's another method at the bottom, which is called general access. We have pre-populated lists for general access to kind of help facilitate PPS staff with knowing who they're sharing with if they're providing somebody a link, because as always, if we have a link, someone can always provide that link to someone else, and we don't want to make sure that those links don't get out of hand to where other people in the district may get a hold of those links when they shouldn't have access. By default, all files under that link item is restricted. So it's going to be only the people who you've designated to have access should have access. So when we're looking at those two pieces for the settings gear, and then also choosing those different levels of access, a lot of people don't know about that settings piece. And so it's important because you might have someone as an editor, but you don't want them to be able to add or include other people to the file. So I can say for this file, well, I'm actually going to remove this. So anyone who is an editor, they aren't able to add anybody else, and they're not able to change the permission scope of how that file is being shared. As well, if we want to protect the file too, a lot of people don't know as well that you can have viewer and commentator status to where they cannot make a copy of the file, download, or even print it. Obviously, that helps mitigate in the beginning, but nothing's going to stop me from taking a screenshot. You know, these are just simple tools that help kind of ensure that users aren't accidentally sharing information that shouldn't be shared. And then as well, over here on the left, you have the options for when you're providing a level of access for someone. So we have
viewer, commenter, and editor. And this is for each document. You can set these. You can also apply these sharing settings to folders. Okay, so there are 3 levels of sharing. So in those methods, you can right click, select the share there. You should also be able to do the highlight method. So in our 3 levels, we have view, and this does what it says. People can view the individual file. They can't edit it, they can't change it, and they can't share with anyone else. So they can't add anyone else to this file. And so that can be set for the folder or the files themselves. So that's the most restrictive option we have if you're going to share. Next is comment. So this is only for files, but it allows view permissions, and it allows people to put in comments on the side in little bubbles to offer suggestions, edits, any thoughts they may have, but they can't actually edit the file or share it with others. So this is sort of a middle ground in between viewer and editor. So the final one we have is edit. So this edit permission allows other people who you've given editor permission to make changes to the document. They can also, and this is important, share the document with other people. So that means even though I've only shared a document with Casey, if he's an editor, he can then go share it with Luke, Mark, and John. And depending on those permissions, if they've been set as editors, they can also share it out. So this is something you want to be careful of, and just know if you do select editor rights for someone, just the blanket default is going to allow them to share. So we suggest you use this permission when you want to collaborate with others that you trust. So you know the people, you know they should be in the document, they should be editing it, and you're aware that they are able to share it out. Add expiration. So you can actually add an expiration date to your files. And this will allow you to restrict how long files are provided that access. So this is an important habit to build when collaborating with outside partners. If, for instance, you have a report that you need to share outside for a deadline, once that deadline's passed, the other people don't need access to that document anymore. So it's a good idea to just set this deadline here. You never have to think about it again. That access will expire. General access list. So this makes it a lot easier if you need to share a document with a group within PPS, but you don't want to have to individually enter in everyone's name. So if you do a general access, you can limit it to PPS all staff and contractors, or all teachers, all school administrators, BESC staff, or Portland Public Schools. And it's important to note that Portland Public Schools includes students. So if you select this option, any student with the link is going to be able to get in there. And then the very bottom underneath that is anyone with the link. So that's just blanket. It doesn't matter if people are internal PPS or external. If you have that setting selected, everyone with the link can get in there. This can be really handy because, again, it will open it up to everyone who may need it. But these are larger groups. So depending on the sensitivity of a document, this is something that you may not want to set. The more sensitive the document, the more you would want to limit that to an individual, and then go ahead and set those editor, viewer, and commenter for that.
Yep. And one thing to clarify too, the Portland Public Schools one is auto-populated. So we can't control that, how it's worded. And so that's where it's important for us to clarify students are included because they're part of our domain here at Portland Public Schools. We've talked to Google about fixing that. We're hoping that they'll add some accessibility for us to change that so it has a proper designation to let people know that students are there. The other options, those were agreed upon within Otis in terms of most common group bands within Portland Public that would be helpful for creating those links. Then I believe our next slide is going to talk about shared drives, which a lot of people, they see, but they're not necessarily familiar with. And so an example for typically with the shared drive, and I have another window up here as well, you would see it right underneath my drives. If we were to zoom in here, you can see it here. If you are included on any other shared drives, they will populate here automatically. So there may be some other people in your department or even at your building who have designated, you know, this group of people are going to have access to this shared drive. So you'll see those. You also have the option to create a shared drive as well. One thing to point out is that these aren't necessarily deletable at this time. So once the shared drive's there, it's created. If you're done with it, we'll kind of talk about how you can hide those so that they're not searchable and having those cleaned up. But what you typically do if you have a group of people you want to work with or a department, you can always go right click and create a new shared drive, you name it, and then Google will handle the rest. There are no limitations with shared drives in terms of how many files are allowed in there, how many people can be a part of a shared drive. So that's important to know. Let me get back here to the presentation. So for shared drives, you're going to have different permission sets for how you want people to interact with those. It's going to be different from an individual file because obviously with shared drives, you may have people included who can help you facilitate with managing the users, as well as maybe you just want people who are able to put files in there, but they can't necessarily take anything out. So some of those options you can see over here for when you right click and do manage members on there, you'll see these options for when you select somebody to be included. So by default, you have viewer. They can go in, they can view any of the files, any of the folders. You can't micromanage folders. So if somebody has access to a shared drive, but you have a folder in there you don't want them to have access to, they're going to be able to view it no matter what. That's one thing to know about. Obviously, we have the commenter one, which we covered earlier, which means that they can go into any file, they can provide feedback and comments and highlight items for people to review. We have the contributor role, which allows them to edit files, but also add or create files. And then content manager, which is important because content manager can delete files that are in the shared drive. They can move files that are in folders. So that's important to know that if you have somebody designated as a content manager, and you have multiple people working out of shared drive, it's important to understand that if a file moves and someone's wondering where that file is at, that everyone's kind of in the same communication, knowing what's going on there. And then finally, you have manager. So a manager is going to be able to add additional people to have access. They'll be able to also change the settings of the shared drive, which we'll look at in the next slide. But the one thing a manager can't do is remove the owner. So if you're the creator and you're designated as the owner, you will always be that owner. And it's important for the owner themselves to be able to change who's going to be owner of the shared drive. So when we look at settings for shared drive, it's a little bit more expanded than files. So if we're wanting to make sure that we have things under control for the shared drive, we can say that we don't want anybody outside of our district to be able to view those files. We can also say that anyone who aren't members can't access those files, because sometimes we can have files we can share out internally, right? So we have the shared group, or I mean the shared drive. In there is maybe a document that is for documentation, and I can share that out with a group or an individual. But what I can do instead is say this shared drive, any of the files in here, if someone tries to share them, they can only share with those who already have access. So that way we don't have someone accidentally sharing a file that doesn't need to be shared out to a group or people that shouldn't have access. So that's really important to know. And then also the same security setting like we saw before with other files is that we can say if anyone has a viewer or commenter role, that they're unable to print or copy those files. The only difference for shared drive, which I honestly think Google may include in the future, is having that timed access. I would love to have a shared drive and be working with a contractor or a vendor and say, this account has access to this shared drive for 30 days. You can obviously do that down at the file level still, but as a shared drive goes, that would be a really good bonus. And then the screenshot at the bottom here just shows that if anyone was going to try and delete a shared drive that they create, they're unable to. It will be blurred out. And that's just how our organizational settings are right now, because we don't want to lose files. We want to make sure everything's retained, because the way Google functions is that we have everything stored for records. And so we want to make sure that those items aren't accidentally deleted forever and we're not able to recover that. So transitioning from shared drive, it's also important that we're looking at these things that say allowing people outside of Portland Public to access files. We do have that option, so it's really important for us to kind of review what does that look like when we share outside the district, and what is that experience for people who either we're working with, or it's parents, or it's an outside contractor, anything like that. So when we're looking at sharing outside of PPS, it's really important that we have some things that we consider about in terms of, do these documents have identifiable information? Do they have information about students that shouldn't necessarily be shared out? Always consider, how long something is going to be shared for, if it's going to be a permanent share or temporary piece. Does the file need to be public? Because sometimes, like we said, with the general access, if I say anyone with the link, that means anyone. If that link's posted on Reddit, if it's posted on Twitter, anybody clicks on it, they have access. And so sometimes we want to make sure that files don't have too much access for people to be able to view. And the same thing, like I just said here, is that they can be shared between viewers. So that's something to consider when you're sharing outside. There's other things that you can do with sharing files. If you are to change this general access to like an editor, those outside people, they don't necessarily have to have a Google account. They can do a temporary thing to where their Google provides them that editor access without having to have a Gmail account. That's an important thing to know as well. Not everybody has to sign up for Google to be able to collaborate or to be able to edit on these files. So this is the generic, general overview of all the permissions and access with Google Drive. Obviously, we wanted to leave some time open up for questions and for comments. So I don't know if we have any questions at this time for what we reviewed. I also have another window here that we can go through different scenarios if we want to, just to be able to have a better understanding of how those menus work.
I'm very new to Google just since I started working here. So you explained the difference between my drive and shared drives. But so if I have to create a document or even a folder, would I automatically just put it in my drive or what
Yeah,
would,
by default, you
okay,
would do that in your drive.
okay.
So let me just get over here. So yeah, by default, everything I work on, everything that I'm wanting to do for my work
Hmm.
would be done in my drive.
So even if I create folders or like when should I create it in shared drives instead of my drive?
Typically, what I would do if my department has a shared drive, if it's documentation
Uh,
or project work that is going to be continually worked on, and you
Okay.
don't want anyone to lose access to that file, then you would go see if your team has a shared drive and create that folder or file in there.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if Hailie, if you have any other scenarios you would like to add to that.
yeah, just as an example, Gina, in Otis, we have a shared drive. And under that shared drive is a folder for each of our sub departments, project work, and it goes down from there. So actually, I can see everything in Casey's department in those documents because we're all part of Otis. But that's understood, and there's nothing in there that needs to be hidden from me. And same with my department documents for Casey. Uh, I think of it as anything that needs to sort of outlive me goes into a shared drive. Because as Casey mentioned, your My Drive, those documents are tied to your user account. So if you move on from PPS, those documents are now going to be in a zombie state and eventually go away. Whereas anything in a shared drive is still going to live with that department, and no one needs to go in and save those files or make sure that it's there. It already is. So for anything that's my department or needs to outlive me, I put it in a shared drive. If I am creating a message or a test work or taking notes in a meeting, those I'll generally do in my drive. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I like how you said, anything that has to outlive me here. So I have so when I open up my drive, it shows at the very top, it shows everything like suggested. So the top bar is all
Yep.
suggested stuff. Yes.
Yep.
And then below, what I see below is that those are exactly my files,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
not
So
the. What's what's the
suggested could
difference? Yeah.
be anything that's shared with you. So like when I have a meeting during the day and that meeting has meeting notes,
Yes.
Google is going to automatically identify it's this time you have this meeting. I'm going to suggest that you open these notes, and those notes will actually be here. I might not be the owner of them,
Okay.
but since they're shared, it'll be suggested there. It'll also do it based on their algorithm. So certain days of the week or anything, those suggestions will change.
So suggested is just Google trying to be helpful, and you'll find the more you work in Google, the more Google is suggesting things. The suggested doesn't necessarily live in your drive. Casey, can you show us
Correct.
how we can change the icon view of this screen?
Yep. Yeah. So up on the top right, we have this little list layout. And this will allow us to change how our files are listed here. As for suggested, I don't think there's any way. Are we able to change how suggested looks? Because I don't think we are.
I don't think
But I
so.
do know that at least for the file layout, I always prefer doing listed because grid can be all over the place. And then that way it gives you more information too, right? So we have a list, or we have it with just the tiles. It doesn't tell me who's the owner. It doesn't tell me when the file was created. If I go up here to the top right, click list layout, then it's going to give me more information about when this was last worked on. And of course, I can click on here. I can click the information piece, and it'll give me more information about this, when it was created. It's not shared with anybody, so that's good.
And I find that view also makes it easier to differentiate between the suggested and my files in my drive, which is everything in the name, owner, modified down.
And then one good example I think is important for people to know. So say I'm in here, I have a folder, right, that I've created. And what we've seen in the past is that, so I have a project folder, and all of a sudden a user's collaborating with other users. So they go and they share and they let other people work in here in this folder. But what happens is in this project folder, there's other files added, but the owner's someone else. So I have a project folder, we're collaborating. The other people don't know that the files they've created are actually in my drive. So that if for whatever reason my account's suspended, that folder is no longer accessible to them. Their files still exist in Google Drive somewhere. The only way they're going to find it is if they click search. There's actually a special term for that. We call them orphaned files, where the folder itself no longer exists. So either it was deleted or they became suspended. And then that file is there, but as the owner, for me, like when I go to my own drive and I look at my files, I'm not going to find it. So that's where the solution with shared drive is, with people transitioning in and out, whatever's created in there, it stays there. It may even still say that that person who transitioned out is the owner still, but it's not going to affect who has access.
And so
Okay.
going down the side in the navigation, priority is another place where Google is just trying to be helpful. So it's using its own logic for that. Shared with me is a nice place to go if you want to see documents that have recently been shared with you. Recent is nice. That'll list the last few documents that you've looked through. And then starred. So you can actually star any document or any folder, and that can make it easier to find if you're dealing with a bunch of files in a bunch of different folders. But you know, you'll be going back to your project frequently. So you can start like that. And then if we go over to the start in the left-hand side navigation, there you go. So that makes it sort of a shortcut for you. So you can always get back to that folder without having to search through or drill down. Trash is the trash, and documents stay in here for 30 days. And at 30 days, they disappear. So you do have that little window to panic and say, oh no, I did need that document, and bring it back. But if you had anything in there and you wanted to force a delete, you do have that empty trash option. So that will be an option if you had a document in there to just force it to go away. You know you don't need it. In terms of storage, I believe Google is putting restrictions in our total size limits, but you're not gonna hit it for the most part. They're pretty large limits, so you don't need to worry about that.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely have a considerable amount of storage based on our licensing, and we've already estimated that we wouldn't be severely impacted by that. Are there any other questions, Gina, or you feel like you're better acquainted with kind of, how Google Drive functions?
Just one more. Like I receive invoices from clients, vendors that my department has to pay for. So when I receive them and I open them or anything, it shows up on my drive.
What email client are you using?
What do you mean?
Are they emailing you the documents, the invoices?
Yes, they email me, to the regular Google pps.net,
So you go to
and
the main.
they email it as attachments. So I download them, I upload them. They automatically upload to my drive, and then I see that. So, and some of them has my name on it, but then once I upload it to like our payment system, it shows that Andy Wheeler in IT is the owner. Why does that happen? Is that because he created that other folder where all the invoices sit?
That could be. Where do you upload them?
I don't know. They just,
Is it a different site or system that you log into?
it's magic. He created a Google form,
Uh-huh.
and so I grab it from my desktop and drag it into that Google form, and
So I think that's the difference is when you submit a file via a form, whoever's the owner of that form essentially becomes the owner of the submitted file when it's processed in.
okay, so that would explain why sometimes I have two versions that I'm looking at. I mean, no, they're the exact same thing, but some of them will say Andy's name on it, and the other copy will have my name.
Yeah.
Depending on which folder I'm looking at it.
So when you are in your email and there's an attachment in there,
Yes.
Again, Google tries really hard to be helpful. So when you hover over it, it has an option to import it into Drive. And I wonder if maybe that's the way you're clicking on it, and that's how it's magically appearing in your Drive. And then you're submitting it via the Google form, so that brings it in again. So then there's duplicates of the document.
Oh, I see what you mean, but yeah, no, I do click the download.
You click the download.
But I see now that that is an option that would automatically, if I hit the other one, the add to drive,
Yep,
it would
that's right.
automatically go to my drive. Okay, that's good to know too. Okay, I can do this.
I have all the faith in the world.
Okay, no, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad we could have this conversation to help you kind of, be situated and understand kind of how that's functioning for you. So that's great.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and close this session. Thank you both so much for your time.